I'm Gus Greenaway.
And I'm Aleena Greenaway.
We're here between Gunnedah and Mallee on a place called Leyburn.
So Leyburns just under 1,400 acres, and we are primarily a fine wool merino operation. So we've got our breeding ewes, and then any of our excess weather lambs and excess ewe lambs we then sell into the fat lamb trade.
So we pretty much moved here about 2 years ago from Western New South Wales. Growing up there, drought was a pretty common thing. Seeing the worst of it out there back in 2017, 18, 19. Because it's so raw, the dry time, it makes you go, rightio, we don't want to go through that again. What can we do different to not make it so severe on probably the stock and the business and ourselves in the next dry time? Pasture management, ground cover management were two big ones that we saw out west in the dry. Having a new place has given us the ability to try new things with no preconceived notions of how we've done it before. When we moved here, we had the opportunity to be part of the Farm Business Resilience Program. It was just by chance, really good timing, new farm, gave us a bit of confidence to make a few changes that we probably wouldn't have had the confidence to do without a bit of support. Coach giving us a healthy little push along.
One of the quotes that Stuart gave us quite regularly was, "You don't know what you don't know." And a lot of the time in farming it can be, you don't want to admit you don't know something or that you need help with something.
And that led us to then finding agronomists that was on board with goals we had for the property in terms of changing our pastures, mixed species, perennial pastures, using less chemical, using less fertiliser. We got a new sheep classer who was in line with where we want to go with the stud. We've got a new nutritionalist who's on board with us in the direction we want to go, the livestock as well, and has probably given us the confidence to go, rightio, we can improve these pastures. This paddock's pretty much multi-species, consists of lucerne, chicory, clover, and then three types of grasses being cocksfoot, fescue, and prairie grass. We got winter components, summer components, so we got feed all year round. We don't have paddocks that are fallowed out, not providing any feed. We've got the legume components in this that are feeding the grasses, so it looks after itself. We've got a bulbous taproot in the chicory, which gets rid of a lot of compaction issues, softens the ground. Not having to fallow out and spray it all the time, we're using less chemicals, and with a manure program we can use less synthetic fertilisers on it as well. Something like this would cost us $500 to $600 a hectare in the first 12 months of its life, and then is going to cost us a further $150 to $200 a hectare in the second year of its life. After that, the costs are about $20 to $30 a hectare per year in maintenance between feeding it with fertiliser. In comparison, if we were to plant an annual cereal crop in this paddock, such as oats, we're looking at around $80 a hectare per year, but that's every year for those 10 years. So all of a sudden, $500 a hectare over 10 years compared to $80 a hectare every year over 10 years, the saving benefits over that 10-year period is phenomenal. On top of that, a lot better weight gains on this. We've got way more biodiversity in our paddock. We're getting 9 months grazing out of it, whereas in an annual cereal crop, you might get 3 to 4 months grazing out of it every year. It's a lot of cost up front, but yeah, over a 10-year grazing life works out a lot cheaper.
And as merino farmers too, they've got a broad range of feed in here 12 months of the year, so they're not having sort of food shock when they're changing onto a cereal crop back to a legume crop. Like, they're not having that huge dramatic change in feed qualities. It's pretty even.
For containment feeding, we've put all the sheep in 2 small sacrificial paddocks. We've experimented with a few different ways of feeding. Our ewes on a maintenance ration, being older animals, we had a few issues with them not getting the right quantity across the mob. We found putting it in a trough. The first animals were getting too much and the last animals in the trail were not getting enough. So we've gone to putting it on the ground. It takes them a bit longer to pick it up, but everybody's getting a lot more even amount. Whereas here we've got lambs that are on a different ration, trying to fatten them on a growth ration, and they are getting fed in a trough, so they're getting enough so they've got free access to it all day, essentially. So yeah, we want them to eat as much as possible. So in a trough, off the dirt for them, works pretty well. So a real easy way that we've done to get our feeding quantities right is we've opened the chute on the trailer to a certain point, and we've measured what the flow rate is in grain in kilos per second at that spot. And then that lets us know how many seconds we need to feed for, depending on how many head are in a mob. Then we know they're all getting the right amount.
So our ewes are on a maintenance ration of barley, and then we've given them free access to straw. So we feed them barley every day, and that's just for their energy to keep them fighting fit the way that they came out of the paddocks. Whereas the lambs here, we're feeding them a mix of barley and then lupins. So the barley again for energy, but then the lupins for protein, and protein's essential for muscle development and growth. Hence why we're giving it to the lambs, just to allow them to get the best start, whether they be wethers to go into the food industry or for breeding ewes down the track for fertility. Like, we're very comfortable. We know when our ewes are going to lamb, so that we know exactly when we need to have these current lambs turned off, so that we've got paddock space. If it's still dry, we've got trough space. And we can plan ahead. We know exactly when, down to sort of a week, we're like, right, these lambs will be heading off on such and such a date. That then allows us to plan when to work the paddock in preparation for future planning.
Changing our calendar with our lambing, that decision was based around, we saw in the drought having lambs born and not having adequate feed. Their wool's not as good, their conformation's not as good, they're not as large, and when it gets dry now here, they're the first ones to suffer. They seem to lose condition before everything else. So from that point of view, looking after your lambs and your weaners when they're young has a huge long-term benefit. Changing our calendar to lamb in autumn instead of spring when we moved here, the reason behind that was giving our lambs the best feed possible over the summer months on the pastures that grow the best here. Like, we're predominantly summer rainfall here, so summer pastures are safer, a lot more reliable. That's given us the opportunity to look after our lambs when they're young and giving us long-term benefits, even from breeding, wool, meat. We've got all those benefits in the long term.
We've had a few neighbours come in to say, oh, what did you do there? Like, that looks really good. The sheep are looking really good. It's sort of a pat on the back then when the neighbours are starting to come around, seeing what you're doing. This newfangled thing you're trying out, how well that's going for you.
We weren't sure how prepared we were coming into this one. We realised we're a lot more prepared than what we thought. Now, coming into the next dry period, I think we'll do it even better. I think we can match weight gains, containment feeding, what we can in the paddock on a pasture. In the last 6 months, surprisingly, the first time in my life, I've actually heard Dad say, he goes, oh, your sheep, you've done very well with the sheep. Geez, they're looking good. And I've never heard that in my lifetime. So it's quite rewarding.
It's a very comfortable feeling. We're coming out of a dry period, our stock look fantastic. Our paddocks with our trigger points, we've pulled the stock off at the right time. We've given the paddocks their respite. So it's a pretty comfortable feeling. You walk away feeling, geez, we've done a good job.